Hey, what's happening, guys? Dan Darrow here with another Options in Play video update. If you thought that it could not get any crazier, these wild, wild swings, well, guess what? It might, because this week was very, very, very busy with earnings, but next week, almost as busy in terms of like the lineup of heavy hitters and really key names. So buckle up. It's gonna be a very busy week, and there are just a ton of names to focus on. So this video, kind of like the last couple videos, I want to like narrow down the names that are on my radar. I won't necessarily be trading them all, but some of the names that as I game plan heading into the coming week, these are the ones that I kind of have tentatively circled that seem to be interesting setups, or at least the names that you can assume most everybody's going to be focused on, right? So, earnings season full swing here, right? We're maybe midway or slightly past the midway point, and the heavy hitters that needed to crush estimates to stabilize this market have not been the best, right? Amazon and Google mixed reports on Thursday afternoon, wiped out all of the bounce gains for Microsoft's strong quarter, and what that shows you is just how important these numbers are, right? You got Microsoft. Microsoft beats, everything rips, and all of a sudden, like the bottom's in, and we're going back up from here, and then like the next day, Amazon and Google mix and get dumped, and then all of a sudden the market dumps, and then all of a sudden people worrying about the market crashing again, and it just shows how fast momentum is shifting in this market, and how like we are just like hanging on these reports. So that's why it's really important to kind of focus on earnings, because you can just see how much we pivot on a day-to-day basis just based off the way like these numbers come in. So Monday morning, let's jump into this here. Monday morning before the open, kind of the quiet before the storm, if you will. No real major names, but CTB, just Cooper Tire, looks like an interesting short candidate to me. Hanging near the low, you can see, weak bounds hanging near the low. Uh, Goodyear Tire on Friday uh, was pretty bad, right? And if CTB disappoints, this thing could have a pretty material breakdown into the 20 area. Flagging at the low of its range. If it drops and breaks 2250, which was the previous low, probably looking at a measured move down into 20. They're priced in at about 2.5 points there. So that's one that we're going to be watching for Monday morning. After the close Monday, you got a couple smaller, more volatile names: Akamai and Trex, TREX. So Akamai had an inline quarter in August. Sold off. So not great response. This one has a history of weak guides. Currency fluctuations can kind of wreak havoc with their numbers, Akamai, if you're not familiar with it. So weak guides or revenue misses in this tape have really been spelling trouble. So kind of be a little bit more cautious with this one, especially you're looking at this setup. Have a history of mixed to weak numbers, and it's hovering above a huge gap. That could get dicey real quick. The Akamai is priced in about 6 points. Trex, the other name. So this one's been a rock star. I mean, look at this move. You can see. I mean, just really just incredible. Well, it was incredible up until about September, right? And then it's been really unincredible. Uh, uh, the real estate. So this is, if for those not familiar, this is a residential and commercial real estate supplier name. They do the decking, and this group has just been absolutely brutal, just brutal. Uh, Mohawk on Friday, just horrendous. Just an absolute disgusting report following an absolute disgusting report back in July. So, I mean, Trex has been kind of Teflon, and the numbers have been pretty good. up until this point, beaten guide higher. But you're thinking if they slip up this quarter and kind of reversion to the mean, I mean there could be some serious downside in this one. I mean it's still up for the year. It's not a cheap name, and the sector really has been performing like terrible. So you can see how much this has been up. So this could be interesting short candidate, or at least like a speculative short candidate. Tuesday morning, kind of a mixed bag of industrials and materials and housing suppliers. Also, GE, it doesn't look very good. That's Tuesday morning. Cummins, CMI, engine maker. That's Tuesday morning. EXP, Eagle Materials. So that and VMC are both Tuesday morning as well. Then you have a couple other housing names. Masco, which is like can show you, just does not look good. And then Lumber Liquidators, which again another one just really is performing very, very, very bad. Also Allergan and Pfizer, so two pharma names, Allergan and Pfizer. And then I'll circle back to these, but then also Under Armour. So that's like kind of like the retail name all by itself on Tuesday morning. So in terms of the industrials, materials, and housing names, right now thinking could just be on hold because performance really has been so awful, and it's kind of tough to figure out if bad news is priced in. I mean, Mohawk said no. Other names have been beaten up and not been down a lot. So it's kind of tough to figure out stocks that are just like collapsing into their numbers. What type of bad news is priced in? So right now we're looking, but maybe be on hold depending on how like the next couple days play out. Allergan though could be an interesting one. You can see that this was in a pretty nice little range for a while above 180 and stuck underneath like 190 or low 190s resistance. It just dropped down here, but for the most part, the last few months it was in like a pretty tight range above 180. One of these scenarios where numbers could kind of decide whether it has a breakout or a breakdown. I mean, it's leaking lower a little bit, but I mean not enough where it's like a material breakdown. Looking at the straddle for next week, they're pricing in about 10 points, but that seems like it could be kind of light, right? Like if it gets back above 180, it's got easy room to like the low 190s. So I mean, right there, you're looking at 15 points. Measured move breakdown below 180. Or not even. I mean, like just to reset at the bottom of like this range, which you can see, you're moving maybe a move down to low 160. So price it in 10, but seems to be visibility for maybe like 12 to 15, if not potentially more. So that one seems like could be an interesting volatility candidate. Under Armour. So picture tells the story here. Basically, just been lower highs, right? Lower highs and lower lows since that really big June surge. So stock is acting weak. It's consolidating under previous resistance, right? So it dropped back below, reset underneath it, it's hanging on to 200 day. It was hit last quarter, even though the numbers were okay. Nike sold off this just recently after a decent quarter, so it seems like bears are kind of in control at the moment. Thinking that this would have to be a blowout to turn the ship around. As much as you hate to say it, but probably needs like an absolute blowout to really get people back on board here. They're looking for about 2.25, so 225 is the price to move for next week. After the bell Tuesday, Baidu, China Internet, EA, Electronic Arts, Facebook. Needs no introduction, and then FireEye. And then also, after the bell Tuesday, start to see a bunch of the E&P names, so the energy names, which could be a real volatile bunch. So FireEye, interesting speculative long. This is one that if like maybe not so much on like the short term, but on the further back you go. I mean, look at this. This thing has been range bound for so long. I mean, obviously tech has been under some pressure, but this thing, comparatively speaking, hanging in well, and still, I mean, once this thing gets through 20, there could really just be a fantastic move higher. So interesting speculative long there. Facebook's obviously the main event. You know, that's the one that everybody's gonna be focused on. It's coming off its first serious miss as a public company, just absolutely destroyed. It's and honestly, the price action's not been great since sitting down near the 2018 low here. You have to be looking for a rebound print. I mean that's just like the way it's been on such like an fantastic run for so many years. You're looking for a bounce back print, but you have to acknowledge that the setup maybe 50-50. Yes, expectations are lower, and the stock has been hit hard, right? But the user slowdown was pretty key last quarter, and that can take a while to fix. Ask Twitter and Snap about that. So I think there could be a really wild swing on this one. Long biased, but do acknowledge that a lot of people are saying this is cheap. That doesn't mean it can't get cheaper. And I was looking at the options, pricing about 12 to 13 points. I'm thinking some sort of volatility strategy in earnings would be an interesting bet here. There's currently an open, longer dated March call fly, right? It's kind of out of the money now. Back, when it was first initiated, it was hanging like the 170s, 180s, so the 190 bottom end of that. It's a little bit further out of the money, so probably gonna have to adjust that ahead of earnings. Just FYI. All right, Wednesday morning, GM, Kellogg, Clorox. Um, you know, I don't want to say snooze fest, but not major market moving stuff. Also, Wednesday morning you have a bunch of other E&P names though, so still like that energy. It's going to be a really really busy stretch for that group. Hess, just to name a couple, Hess and Chesapeake are a couple of the bigger names there. But just generally speaking, like I talked about in industrials last week being a real high concentration, you're gonna have a really high concentration of energy stocks reporting this week. So expect that sector to be in play. After the close Wednesday, beating it over the head here, but it's energy, and more energy. Also interesting after the close Wednesday, a couple semis, NXPI and Corvo. So back to NXPI. This obviously the stock looks terrible. I mean, you could say that about a lot of semis at the moment. But the reason this is interesting because it's actually its first report as a standalone company again, right? So when the M&A was officially called off, the stock is back to being like a standalone. So because it hasn't been in play for so long. I mean, yes, it was moving up and down off of like M&A, basically like the how the M&A headlines played out. It was how this thing moved, but the M&A was the end of 2016, so this stock really hasn't been trading off of like earnings or anything for a couple of years. So I'm thinking that the options could be pretty mispriced on this one, right? It's just been so out of play for so long that I feel like. Right now, the weekly straddle is saying 6.5 points, but it could be one of those scenarios where those options could be really light in the sense that people don't really know, like the demand, how this thing's going to move, the numbers. There's a lot of moving parts, and because it hasn't been, it's been public, but it hasn't really been traded for a while. This could be an interesting one. Also, Corvo. So this, in terms of semis, this is hung in better than the overall group. Why it's interesting is because it's an Apple supplier, right? Corvo, if you're not familiar, it's an Apple supplier, and this one's going to be really closely watched. It's Skyworks, Cirrus, Broadcom. These are all going to move off the Corvo number, and also probably Apple too. So they're looking for about a 7-point move on Corvo. Take a toss up to me. I'm not sure how I would play it. Maybe like this is a good one for like a sympathy trade, right? Like because Skyworks and Cirrus and Broadcom will move with it, so it could be a good sympathy candidate. 7 points is the price to move on Corvo, but those are monthly options, so odds are it's probably a little bit less. Thursday morning, Uh, a couple smaller names. FND. This is our old friend, right? Treated us well short trade recently when it gapped down and broke. Just things just really started to fall apart. That was part of like the short thesis. Uh, I mean, there's really no reason to believe this can't go lower. It's still kind of an expensive stock with slowing growth in a weak real estate supply market. Uh, this thing could still have like a real material breakdown. It's now below the IPO level, so I mean that's still one that's on our radar as like a short candidate. Wayfair, another one. Volatile, heavily shorted retailer, right? So just there, that makes it interesting. Options are expensive though, about 16 points, so not cheap. But it has been moving in pretty wide ranges recently. So you can make the argument that this thing could see a 20-point swing. I mean, it's 30 points to where it was 3 weeks ago, or obviously it's not cheap. It's heavily shorted and it's up a lot. So, this market seems like things that slip up are really punished. So, 16 points, but there could be, 16 points. You could see 20, maybe even more on that one. SSYS. So this thing had a really nice move following last quarter. Decent number, and then went on like this really great run. And unfortunately, it's come all the way back down. So we wrote it up and then wrote it back down. Volatility, it began returning though, right? A stock that was out of play for a while, the volatility really began returning to the stock, and it seems like the options maybe not reflecting that still. Only pricing in about 2.25. So post last move, it really had like a huge run. Options don't seem to be reflecting that expanded volatility. Could be a good straddle or a strangle candidate. Seems to be room higher, and then obviously room lower too. Still pretty heavily shorted also. All right, after the close Thursday, Arista, FTNT, GoPro, Mercado Libre, Shake Shack, Starbucks, OLED, all of those interesting. All probably going to be in play. May have position on a couple, right? But honestly, 99 out of 100 eyeballs are going to be on Apple. Apple earnings are Thursday after the close. So there's basically Apple and then everybody else, right? So what do we make of Apple? Personally, I find this a pretty tough setup. Why? So first off, it's up still a lot from last earnings. You could see went in around 190. It's still hanging in tough, and it really is maybe the only FANG name to be sitting on substantial gains since summer earnings. I mean, Amazon lower, Google lower, Facebook lower, Netflix lower, Microsoft actually I think a little bit lower as well. So it's literally the only FANG name that's still sitting on gains from last quarter. It's off the high, but really not by a whole lot. So you have to assume expectations are still pretty high on this one. People just aren't giving up their stock. Also, there's a good chance that Apple's going to see some headwinds from the tariffs and China trade issues, right? And it just seems in this environment that it's hard to expect a large amount of upside. Just even if it's like a clean beaten guide, I mean, it just seems like a tough environment to expect that. On the other hand, if they miss, there could be a relatively significant amount of downside to catch up with peers. It's like I said, it's the only one to be sitting on gains from last quarter. It hasn't pulled back much. Options looking about 12 to 13 bucks. It's the price to move for next week, which seems kind of expensive too. So it only moved about 11 and a half last quarter, and that was one of the bigger moves it's had in a while. So right now, no position. I have no position, and honestly, a lot can change between now and next Thursday. Especially the way this market is moving. So this is probably going to be something that we wait and see how it develops, see how the option position is, see how the options look. If the market rebounds and is acting better next week, maybe we'll take a shot. But overall, I feel like this is a very, very, very tough setup. So Friday morning actually has some heavy hitters. I mean, it was all about this week was all about Thursday, Wednesday night and Thursday night. Actually, Friday morning, this upcoming week, you have some big guys. So Baba and the Chinese tech stocks just they've been the tough is like the name of the game here. I mean just a tough downtrend. Lower high, lower high, lower high, lower high, lower low, lower low, lower low, lower low. Uh, the numbers have been good for Baba, but the market just really just doesn't seem to care. I mean, it's hanging near its 52-week low, right? Hanging near its 52-week low. Wasn't rewarded on August earnings, so it's tough to see material upside on this one. It's kind of between a rock and a hard place. Doesn't seem to be a lot of room lower. I know there is a gap, but I feel like there maybe not a whole lot of room lower in this one, but also it's kind of a struggle to get any sort of sustained bounce. This to me is kind of like in the wait and see camp. Maybe like be on the sidelines for earnings. If it pops and holds, then maybe it signals maybe some money flow back into China names, and you could see a pretty steady rebound. Options pricing in about 11 points, so not real cheap options, not great action. Probably just be on the sidelines and watch on that one. Also, Friday morning, Chevron and Exxon, which two peas in a pod. Two biggest energy names, and both report the same morning. So, I'd say generally speaking, the charts are pretty similar, at least over the last couple months. Kind of up, and then took the escalator up, and then the elevator down. Probably will fare the same way. Probably, barring something incredibly unforeseen. Uh, you know, these two, I think like the important takeaway from Chevron Exxon is that these two round out a really busy week for energy and like the E&P group in particular. So that's why I was thinking of focusing on the XLE and the XOP for some sort of strategies, just because there's just like a who's who of energy reporting next week. Uh, Odds are you're going to have some pretty high volatility in that space with just so many names, such like a concentrated amount of names reported. So that's what I'm thinking at this point. Some sort of bet on the XLE or the XOP. All right, I know that was a lot to take in, but there is just going to be so much going on. These videos, I really hope help as kind of like an early game plan. You're watching it over the weekend, you're having your coffee, getting into like that mindset of all of like the big reports coming up. It's great because that's how I approach it. I think it's like really helpful. You got like that game plan in place, so you're not flying into the week blind. So as always, love to hear from you. Reach out, questions, comments, pass them along. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. Rest up, relax, because it's going to be a wild one next week. So I'll talk to you all on Monday.